Hey, greetings everyone. This is Ekon Carr with Restoration Economics, and I'm doing an experiment with my iPhone, just kind of an impromptu video. But I wanted to talk today about why you are living in the consequences of 1979 in the United States, and unfortunately in the world. So I am a Gen Xer, and this is a Gen X point of view about what's going on politically and economically, because I lived through all this stuff and I'm seeing the patterns repeat. So let me just go over what happened in 1979 and how it connects to today. And we're going to pass through 2001 and 2008 along the way. So in 1978 and 1979 in Iran, there was a revolution. There was a Shah, a king, Mohammed, and I'm going to mispronounce this, Mohammed Reza Shah Pahlavi, who was a friend to Western interests. And at the time, Iran was pumping about 6 million barrels of oil a day, which is a lot of oil and a lot of money. And there was a revolution, and on April 1st, April 1st, 1979, the Islamic Republic of Iran came into being under the Ayatollah Khomeini. Now, the Ayatollah and the Islamic Republic were not friendly towards the United States in the 1970s. And the pressure of, what happened in Iran is they stopped producing the 5 to 6 million barrels of oil a day, and there wasn't any replacement. So it created the energy crisis, the oil crisis. And let me give you some data around that. In 1978, gas was 63 cents a gallon. Yes. When I was a child, gas was less than $1 a gallon. By 1979, it had risen to 86 cents a gallon. And by 1981, because of this change in the regime, the change in the friendships, the networks, and how oil was flowing, or not flowing as it were, gas was $1.31 a gallon. Now, that might not seem a lot today, but when you look at inflation over the years and you see that kind of doubling, more than doubling of oil prices back in the late 70s, early 80s, it had a substantial impact. So oil went from $14 a barrel up to $35, $40 a barrel. And I remember there were gas lines. If you went to get gas in your car, there were long lines. They started rationing gasoline based on the last number of your license plate. If your license plate ended in an even number, you could go on certain days of the week or month, like on even days of the month. If your license plate ended in an odd number, you could only fill up on odd days of the month. And a lot of gas stations closed. It was crazy. So this created a national conversation under President Jimmy Carter about how vulnerable the United States was to disruption in foreign oil, okay? And a lot of conversations and a lot of policy came out of that. Two things that happened that we can see the effects of today is, one, they increased the petroleum strategic reserve. There was a lot of talk about investment in alternative energy, and there was a lot of talk about increasing production of oil locally. So these were responses to the Iranian Revolution of 1978-79 and the disruption to the oil dependency that the United States had on the Middle East. Now, a lot of you may have heard of Al Gore. He's a great climate activist. He was just elected to the US Congress in 1976. So he's a junior congressman in Congress at this time. And so he's kind of forged in the debate around the energy crisis and what to do and how to respond. Now, Al Gore took a tract where, at the beginning, alternative energy was a way to help get the United States off of its dependence on foreign oil. But then in the 70s and 80s, the climate science started coming out more and more about the effects of fossil fuels on the environment. And slowly over time, Al Gore transitioned into more of a, hey, this isn't just a geopolitical issue. This is an existential issue for the human race. We need to get off oil, our dependence on oil. So out of this moment of the energy crisis, the whole alternative energy sector starts to come to life. And then the whole, hey, we should just produce more oil locally comes to life. And that results in, hey, let's drill on federal land, or let's open up oil fields in Alaska. And then later in the 2000s and 2010s, shale technology comes on. Let's frack our way to energy independence. And even though both of these movements of alternative energy and oil begin as a response to, energy independence and the energy crisis of 1979, they eventually become competing interests politically in the United States, okay? So when we get to the year 2000, and this is probably the beginning of the political problems in the country, Al Gore, who had been vice president under Clinton, runs for president against George W. Bush. And Bush is more aligned with oil interests, and Al Gore is more aligned with alternative energy interests. It's not as polarized then as it is today, but there's definitely these two different visions competing. And George Bush's brother, Jeb, is the governor of Florida. And the whole election comes down to 537 questionable votes in Florida. And this is where the Supreme Court gets involved. And for the first time in U.S. history, the Supreme Court issues a ruling to declare who the president of the United States is. Now, there are a lot of aggressive oil interests connected with George W. Bush. And Roger Stone and some other famous names are around this push to have the Supreme Court decide who the president is. But George Bush comes to power as president, and then in 2001, September 11th happens. And now we've got a whole new problem geopolitically. There's the attacks on, New York and Washington, during September 11th. And the Bush administration responds by building a coalition of our allies and attacking Iraq. Of course, this disrupts oil production, but it doesn't create the same kind of crisis that the revolution in Iran created in 1979. But then in 2007, they weren't really accomplishing all their objectives in Iraq, right? Hence the problem of forever wars that we started to get into. This was going on 6 years after 9/11. They still hadn't achieved objectives. So they did a surge of troops in Iraq. And that, again, puts a little more pressure on oil prices. Now, a lot of you who are younger, who might not know this history of 1979 and the Iranian Revolution, you remember the 2008 financial crisis. Most of the conversation about that crisis is about, the investment houses and how the derivatives and how they were packaging mortgages and the whole gambling that was going on and the corruption in the financial system. But what not a lot of people talk about is that in the run-up to the financial crisis of 2008, there was another intense spike in gas prices, okay? Let me give you the numbers. In 2006, gas was $2.57 a gallon. In 2007, it was $2.80 a gallon, about. Then in early 2008, it spiked to $3.30 to $3.50 a gallon. This wasn't due solely to the Iraq surge or the war going on in Iraq. It was also the result of people, China was coming online, India, there was more demand on oil, there were tighter controls on oil. But by July of 2008, gas peaked at $4.11 a gallon, and we haven't seen that kind of peak since 2008 until now, almost 20 years later. Okay, a barrel of oil in 2007 was $70 to $90. By July of 2008, it was $147 a barrel. This happens in July of 2008. Lehman Brothers collapses in September of 2008, okay? People had their budgets planned out with an expectation of gas at a certain level, and they could pay their mortgage. When gas prices increased from $2.50 a gallon to over $4 a gallon, people could not afford gas and afford their mortgage at the same time. And there's some research out there about how people who bought houses further away from the urban centers because they were cheaper and relied on that cheaper gas to get to their jobs, those were the kinds of houses that were more likely to go into mortgage default, which triggered the financial crisis. Now, the crisis wouldn't have happened if there hadn't been all the nonsense and corruption in the financial system, but oil and gas prices contributed to the foreclosures that precipitated that event. Okay? So why is that all that relevant today? We're going through the same pattern again. Trump, under Biden, we were actually making some great policy progress on energy independence, investment in alternative energies. EVs have been around now for a while. Like, we're making movement in this, let's get off, not just Middle East oil, but let's get off oil altogether. And Trump has come in and just taken a wrecking ball to science. They're, trying to erase and destroy the record of climate science, calling the climate change issue a hoax, clearly aligned with oil interests, and I won't get into the whole geopolitical piece there, but Trump is clearly about destroying any viability in the alternative energy market and refocusing on oil. And what you're seeing in his military moves, whether it's Venezuela or Iran, is somewhere he's talking or he's aware of people who've lost access to oil they used to be able to access, whether it was Venezuela and what happened when their government changed, or the Iranian Revolution. And he's using the force of the US military to try and get the networks back online to access oil that the United States used to have access to back in the 70s and 80s. The thing is, this is all about oil and money and energy. And the fact that people are using religion and religious war, like there's the Christian nationalists, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth is very much a Christian nationalist. He's framing this war with Iran partly in religious terminology. The Islamic Republic is fighting for their version of Islam. This isn't about religion. God does not condone any of this bullshit, okay? I'm a minister, and I can tell you, we are here to live in love with one another. That is the command in every faith. The war, religion, is being used to get people to go along with what is essentially a war around controlling of oil resources, and trying to stop the transition to energy independence. Because if we truly were in sustainable energy sources, no one would give a damn what happens in the Middle East, because we wouldn't need their oil. So who cares? Why would we be there? We can spend $200 billion on a war with Iran, or we could spend $200 billion investing in local sustainable energy. That's a choice that the U.S. citizens have, and we can talk to our Congress people about it. Now, the thing to pay attention to is that this war in Iran is not winding down yet, and prices of oil are going up, prices on gas are going up. If we hit $147 a gallon again, like we did back in 2008, that we can expect a similar and tremendous ripple effect throughout the economy. People not being able to afford to drive to their jobs, people not being able to afford to pay their rent. Now, a lot of people might be renting instead of having mortgages, but it still means problems with people losing homes, losing their residency, increases in homelessness, poverty increasing, food becoming more expensive, hunger happening, food insecurity happening. All as oil goes up, these are the societal consequences. We have seen it in 1979. We saw it again in 2000, 1979 to the, 1981. We saw it again in 2008. And now we're about to see it again in 2026. Information is power. This is a repetitive pattern. We have choice. And I hope that this video will give you context to think about these things so that you can make the choices that will be best for you, your pocketbook, and your future with your representatives. in Congress. Thank you for listening, and please leave me a like, subscribe to the channel, and let me know if you'd like me to write a more in-depth article about this for our newsletter In Context. Thanks.